what I'm most proud of at being part of Laika is that we're telling stories that are a little bit different. What excites me about film is that you have the opportunity to tell any kind of story, particularly in animation where there are no boundaries. And I think what we do here is that we tell our own stories. We have a unique perspective. We make movies that maybe other people wouldn't make. And I find that very exciting because there really is no limit to the kind of stories that we can tell here. Essentially, we're kind of like making live action movies in miniature. So we have sets, we have cameras and lights, we have all the things that go into a huge Hollywood movie, but we have them in miniature. And I think walking around Laika is a magical experience. You feel like you're walking around Santa's grotto, Santa's workshop. There's so many industrious people, talented artists who are working behind the scenes, making props, sets, puppets, costumes. It's such an eclectic bunch of talented people that you don't often get to see doing these things. I love animation in all its forms, every type of animation. And I think there is a place for it all. There is a place for the kind of crazy Tex Avery, Warner Brothers inspired stuff, and there's a place for the musicals, and there's a place for the fairy tales, and there's a place for everything. I love it all. I would happily drink it all in. I think what's great is that we have our own voice. We're not necessarily chasing the last big success in animation. We are telling stories that are unique. And sometimes they're challenging stories, but I think that was always what excited me most about animation when I was younger. It was the stories that maybe pushed the boundaries a little or challenged you to think. And that's always been a rich tradition of folklore and fairy tale. You're telling stories to kids, to families, and you're asking them to think a little bit about where they fit into the world. I don't think there's been any place that I've worked at quite this long before. You know, I've been at Laika for 13 years, so you get to know these people who work here really well. You almost get a shorthand in working with them, and you get to know them as people. And I think, you know, we've been in the trenches together on many movies now, and it's a play. They're comrades, you know, comrades in arms. They're colleagues and friends, and I think there is something special that comes out of that kind of relationship, that kind of dynamic. When we first started on Coraline, this kind of movie wasn't being made that much. I mean, it's still not compared to like CG movies, although it has had something of a resurgence. But I think when they were crewing up for Coraline, they were really reaching out all over the world for people who were the best at the various jobs that go into making a stop motion movie, and bringing that talent pool together. You know, that I think that was instrumental to the quality of the movies that we ended up making, because you bring all these innovators together and they're going to continue to innovate, and you know, bounce ideas off each other. Missing Link is about Bigfoot, America's legendary beast, and he is lonely and he wants to track down his long-lost relatives, the Yetis, who live in the Himalayas, of course. So he enlists the help of a world-renowned but not entirely successful explorer called Sir Lionel Frost. And Sir Lionel is quite keen on making a name for himself, so he eagerly accepts the challenge, and they go on a quest to locate the mythical Shangri-La. The stuff that I really like is when you have characters communicating and the comedy that comes out of a dynamic relationship. And I think what I was aiming for with Link and Sir Lionel was kind of like an odd couple, that kind of planes, trains, and automobiles dynamic. And I often think of Link as kind of like John Candy as an ape, you know. But it was also that double act, you know. It was the Sherlock Holmes and his very hairy Watson. And I think finding just the humor that comes out of character rather than gags is the stuff that I really like, because it makes you chuckle, but it also makes you identify with the characters. It makes you like them a little bit more. We spend a lot of time thinking about casting and what goes into a voice and what goes into a character. And there was a certain otherworldliness, I think, to Zach, and a vulnerability as well that comes across in his comedy, and insecurity. And that seemed perfect for this creature that had no experience of civilization. He'd never been out in the big, broad world. He'd read about it, but that's not the same as experiencing it. And I think what he brought to it wasn't just the comedy, it was that sense of vulnerability. You do warm to him because you want to comfort him. You want to reach in and give him a big hug because he's a nice guy and he's struggling so hard. In the movie, I wanted a strong female character, but that had her own part to play in this dynamic. And part of it was that I wanted someone to be part of this quest, to be part of this journey, who was opposed to Sir Lionel, but not in the same way that Link was, and creating a history to Sir Lionel. Like, she knows him, she dated him. And I thought that was an interesting facet to it, because she clearly likes him. And I think it's because they share a passion. They share a passion for adventure. You know, it's set in Victorian times, and Sir Lionel spends most of the movie bemoaning how people don't accept him. And he's like a rich white guy, and she's an immigrant, and she's a widow. And, you know, at one point he even says to her, you can't possibly understand what I'm going through. And I liked that she had her own reasons for feeling like an outsider, like Link and Lionel do. There's that rich tapestry of stories that exist that are about adventuring in this bright new historical world. And I wanted to play with that. I wanted Sherlock Holmes meets Indiana Jones chasing monsters. I mean, who doesn't want that? And part of the reason I set it at the turn of the 19th century was because the world was just starting to open up. It was an exciting time. All these new exotic places were becoming more accessible, and certainly becoming more apparent in popular culture. I'm always interested in pushing the boundaries of the medium, pushing the boundaries of stop motion animation. And I think one thing that is traditionally part of stop motion is it's the scope of it is quite small. And that, you know, historically there is a reason for that. You have sets, physical sets, and physical puppets. So the kinds of stories that were being told in stop motion always felt a little bit more maybe claustrophobic. That world has since opened out, and certainly the kind of hybridization of the medium that we do here, using a lot of digital effects, it really meant that we could take what's special about stop motion, which is, you know, real light on real objects, but open up the canvas, knock down the walls. On each movie that we make, we are constantly trying new things, but I think what was special about this particular movie is that we were taking innovations that we've already played with in other movies and we were just pushing them to their limits, and that was a lot to do with the amount of like digital set extensions, CG characters. And I've watched this movie hundreds of times now, and there are shots where I can't tell where there's a puppet and where there's a CG character. So I think we are managing to really make the best possible use of the technology. I think the facial animation on this movie is incredibly successful. We really pushed it as far as we could, and I think we've come up with nuanced and complex character performances in the facial animation like nothing we've seen before. I was very much influenced by Errol Kane, who was an artist who did very detailed, pattern-rich illustrations. He was also the production designer on The Thief and the Cobbler, the 2D movie that was never completed, Richard Williams. So there was that. There was National Geographic. There was all these influences that came together. 101 Dalmatians, the Disney movie, which had a really bold, graphic look that I thought lent itself well to the Victorian setting here. She knows what goes on in here as well as anybody, so I think she understands the kind of movie that I'm trying to make, the kind of story I'm trying to tell. She gets my sensibilities, which is a huge plus for a producer. She shares the sensibilities. She's got a great eye. She's got great taste. And it's the same with Travis. I think the three of us have impeccable taste. So I think that's why we get along. There are those movies that you watch when you're a kid that just stay with you. And for me, it was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it was the Star Wars movies, and it was certain animated movies. But they were those movies who, when I left the theater, I knew I wanted to make films. And I think that's what I want. I want to take kids to this exciting, huge, colorful world that will thrill them and make them laugh and make them fall in love with the characters and walk out the cinema and all want to work in animation. I have watched this thing so many times over the past 5 years, from the storyboard animatics right through to the finished, graded, beautiful final product. And I am still not tired of it. I think it's a beautiful, entertaining, exciting roller coaster of a movie.
Missing Link is the story of a lonely Sasquatch. He lives here, somewhere in the great Pacific Northwest during the Victorian era. He is alone, he's lonely, and he contacts Sir Lionel Frost, who's an aristocratic gentleman who lives in Victorian England, because he actually believes in his existence, and he convinces him to take him on a journey to the fabled valley of Shangri-La in the Himalayas, where he feels like he will be reconnected with his brethren. And along the way they meet Adelina Fortnight, who has a history with Sir Lionel, and she also has a map and will help take him to discover Shangri-La. They kind of go on this journey together, and it's a comedic action. It's a comedy action adventure that spans the globe, and you follow this trio of wonderful characters, and it's really fun, and it's beautiful. we set out to make something intentionally that was a departure from our last film and other stop motion films. And the idea of it being bold and beautiful with really intense colors and kind of a lighter feel, and trying to intentionally step away from what we think maybe audiences might expect from stop motion animation. So it was really intentional, and it was fun. I think there's so much comedy in it. It's like character-driven comedy. We have some slapstick in it, and just the lighter, brighter feeling of it also helps the audience know, it's not bittersweet. It ends. It's more on the side of sweet. I think we explore some real feelings about what it means to be human, what it means to belong, about exploring loneliness a little bit. But because it is bright and bold, it just feels lighter, I think, in nature. And I think the performances are really light and bright. Sir Lionel Frost is played by Hugh Jackman, and he brings a certain joy and panache to the role. I think he gets a kick out of when he's being, at his most egocentric, and it's fun for me as an audience member to watch that. And his interactions with, the Mr. Link character played by Zach Galifianakis is so, it's unexpected. I don't think it's something that audiences have heard before. It doesn't feel like another character. And he is just, like I said, he is innocent, and he's childlike, and he expresses so much joy. You are joyful watching him, and he's physically, you just want to hug him. At least I do. And he's just, I think as characters, you want to spend a lot of screen time with them. Zoe Saldana, as her character, is fun. She's an adventurous in her own right. She's got a great voice, and it's fun and unexpected, the decisions that she makes along the way. I have had the great pleasure of working with Chris on, for over 10 years, and there's anything I know about him, he is all about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he absolutely adores Sherlock Holmes. He enjoys also just like the Victorian time period, and I think Sir Lionel Frost is an incredible combination of both of those characters. Chris Butler is incredible. He has written the script, so he knows the characters inside and out. He knows how they're supposed to sound, what he thinks they're supposed to look like, what they're wearing, how they move. He has a backstory for them, so he knows where they come from and what their secrets are. He knows what their arc is going to be. He has, over the last 10 years grown as a filmmaker here at Laika, and so he knows the ins and outs of stop motions and how you want to push the medium. What's great about it, he's comes from a 2D animator background, and he really brings a lot of that into his filmmaking. The theme about wanting to belong and missing link, I mean, that is the universal theme, I think, for anyone who's human, right? That's what, to me, that's what it means to be human. You want to belong. You want to be loved by your family, by your tribe. You want to fit in. You want to find your place. And I think it's a universal theme. I don't think there's anybody, who doesn't feel that way. What I love about Missing Link is that it takes a very positive approach. By the end of that movie, my hope and feeling, and what we've been trying to do, is that when they watch that movie and leave the theater, people feel like I will find my place in the world, that is absolutely possible for everybody here. In the third act, they're in Shangri-La, they're in the valley, they're on an ice bridge, and they're having a battle. And we're working with all these different scales of puppets, and it's stop motion animation, and everything's practical. So they're like either this big or this big. And it really is suspenseful. And I think I'm very proud of how that was pulled off. There's suspense in it and comedy, and every time I see it, I am concerned. Are they or aren't they? Are they going to, fall to their deaths, or are they going to climb up? And that was grueling to make and put together, but I think really successful. Every time you make one set, that's a unique set, a unique environment. Once you start to push in and figure out how to shoot these things, they multiply, because you have to tear them apart, and maybe you pull things against green screens, or you push in. And so in the end, while we had 65 sets, we had over 95 shooting units. And that is a large, that's just an explosion of work. That's a lot of moving parts to keep track of. And the 65-ness of it all is that what's remarkable about 65 sets is that on this one, we don't ever come back and use that set again. So you might have a set of, for example, the Indian jungle, where it's this incredible, lush, tropical, greens heavy set, where you have a gigantic stop-motion elephant where 4 bodies have to be on the top of it, and it's really only for this one sequence and just like a handful of shots, and never to be returned again. But you put all of this attention and time and effort into it to make it spectacular, and multiply that by maybe 65 times, and then you've got a challenging, epic action-adventure movie in stop motion. First of all, the music is just absolutely lovely, and I recommend you buy the soundtrack and listen to the soundtrack. And it also, of course, supports, I think, the action-adventure of it all. But my favorite really is his kind of emotional music. And he is just natural with it. And it's really, really lovely. We wanted a song, an ends song, an original ends song that would leave audiences on a grace note, and that could express the optimism that I think our 2 characters, bring to the audience. The optimism that they feel in continuing their adventures, in finding their partnership and friendship. And we also wanted a song that was kind of out of time, that didn't say necessarily it was a contemporary song, but didn't want to feel too old-timey either. And I think Walter Martin wrote this song. It's kind of in a nod to, as if it was in the voice of Mr. Link, but it really expresses just the optimism of their friendship just through his vocals and the song itself, and it will stick with you forever. We really love this song. I want them first and foremost to enjoy a really fun, rollicking adventure with wonderful characters that they want to spend a couple of hours with. It's a feast for the eyes. It's a feast for the ears. You want to spend time with these characters. I love its messages. I love how fun it is, and I love how it explores friendship. And I think I want people to leave feeling optimistic about their place in the world and the nature of the world, and what there's so much to explore. The world is a wonderful place to explore, and then you will find your place in it. It may not be your family of origin. It may not be what you think it is at the beginning. The place, where you want to belong may not be the same place that you end up belonging. You're finding out is your right place, but it is there for you. and it's there for everyone.